Edgar Allan Poe is mostly famous for his dark and creepy horror stories, which is involved with ghosts, murders, people getting buried alive. But today we are talking about something totally different, the Purloined letter. It is one of his detective stories and it is actually considered one of the first real detective stories ever written. No supernatural stuff here, just pure intellect, mystery, and a really clever detective solving a case that seems impossible. So, a quick background before we jump in. Poe wrote three detective stories featuring this guy, C. August Dupin. So, if Sherlock Holmes popped into your head, then you're on the right track. Dupin is basically Sherlock before Sherlock. This super smart detective who does not rely on evidence the way police do. He just thinks. Like he solves crimes by understanding human nature and how people behave. The Purloined letter was published in 1844 and it is the third and final story featuring Dupin. But don't worry, you don't need to read the others to get this one. Now let's get into the story. It starts with Dupin and his friend, who is also the narrator, just sitting around in Paris, chilling in the dark, thinking about another case they solved. Then this guy, the prefect of the Paris police, bursts in with a problem. There's this super important letter that has been stolen. And the police know exactly who stole it. It's this shady government minister, and he is using the letter to blackmail a very powerful person. But no matter how many times the police search his house, turning it inside out, looking in secret compartments behind the wallpaper, even measuring the furniture, they can't find the letter. It's like it disappeared into thin air. And that's when Dupin steps in. He listens to the whole thing, lets the police guy rant about how impossible the case is, and then he solves the whole thing in the most unexpected way. A month later, the police comes back, still clueless. But Dupin just hands over the letter and asks for his reward. That's it. He already found it, just like that. So what happened? It turns out that the minister was too smart for his own good. He knew that the police would tear his place apart looking for a super hidden spot. So instead of hiding it, he did the opposite. He left it in plain sight. He disguised it by crumpling it up a bit, changing the way it looked, and just left it out on his desk, mixed it with other papers. The police, searching for some secret hiding place, completely overlooked it. And Dupin, on the other hand, figured out that the best way to hide something is to make it look unimportant. He casually visited the minister, noticed the letter, and later swapped it with a fake one. That's it. You're genius. Now, Dupin did not just recognize where the letter was. He had to outsmart the minister to get it. And knowing that the minister was highly intelligent and would be cautious, Dupin visited him under the pretense of casual conversation. During his visit, he noticed the disguised letter on the desk, but he didn't take it immediately. Instead, he devised a plan. The next day, he returned with a pair of tinted spectacles to hide his eye movements and carried a snuff box as a distraction. Now, while talking, he created a commotion outside by arranging gunshot on the street, which momentarily diverted the minister's attention. And in that brief moment of distraction, Dupin switched the real letter with a fake one he had prepared earlier. Now, the minister thinks that the letter was still safe, and he never realized the switch had happened until it was too late. Now let's talk about what makes this story so interesting. First, it's all about how we think. The police rely on logic and procedure, but Dupin relies on psychology. He puts himself in the thief's mind and realizes that sometimes hiding it in plain sight is the smartest move. So it's all about outthinking your opponent. Then there's the idea of power. The letter itself is not magic. It's just a piece of paper. But it means something. The person who controls it has power. And that is why the minister uses it for blackmail. And that is why the police are so desperate to find it. So Poe is showing us that sometimes power is not about physical strength. It is about information. And of course, there's the theme of deception. Everything in the story is about tricking people. The minister tricks the police by making them overthink. Dupin tricks the minister by pretending that he does not know anything. So it is basically a battle of wits, and Dupin wins because he understands human nature better than anyone else. So, why does this story matter today? It is because it pretty much shaped every detective story that came after. If you like Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, then you can thank Poe for setting the stage. Plus, it's just a fun story. No long drawn out investigations, no dramatic chase scenes, just one brilliant mind solving a case with pure intellect. And that's the magic of Edgar Allan Poe. He did not just write horror, he created detective fiction as we know it. Now, if you are studying this story for an exam, let's talk about the kind of questions you might get. Because sometimes the hardest part of literature is not reading the story, it is figuring out how to answer those long subjective questions that make you wonder if you even understood anything at all. So, one common question is, how Dupin solved the case in the Purloined letter? This one is very straightforward. You just need to explain how the police searched everywhere but could not find the letter because they were overthinking it. Then you talk about how Dupin uses psychology instead of logic as he realizes that the letter is hiding in plain sight, and then he replaces it with a fake one. So the key here is to focus on how Dupin's approach is different from the police. And that contrast is what makes the story interesting. Another question you might get is, discuss the theme of deception in the Purloined letter, which is a very thematic based question. Now don't panic, because when they say theme, they basically mean where do we see deception happening and why does it matter? So you talk about how the minister deceives the police by hiding the letter in an obvious spot, how the police deceives themselves by assuming that it must be hidden in some super secret way, and how Dupin deceives the minister by swapping the letter without him realizing. So just break it down and explain how the whole story is a game of tricking and outsmarting each other. Then there are those slightly scarier questions like how does the Purloined letter challenge the idea that crime can only be solved through physical evidence? And this is where you need to bring in the bigger picture. Normally, detective stories are all about clues like footprints, fingerprints, mysterious notes. But in this story, there's none of that. Because Dupin does not need evidence. He solves the case just by thinking. So you explain how Poe is showing us that sometimes psychology and intelligence are just as powerful as forensic science. And that's a huge shift in detective fiction. Now, if you get a really broad question like analyze the detective elements in the Purloined letter, don't freak out. Just go step by step. First, talk about how it is a detective story. That is, there's crime, a mystery, a detective, and a solution. Then explain how Dupin's way of solving cases is different from the usual detective work. Maybe compare it to modern detective stories where cops rely on DNA and fingerprints while Dupin just understands how criminal minds work. And that will make your answer stand out. Because the trick with these questions is to not just summarize the story. Anyone can do it. What they really want is for you to go a little deeper. Explain why things happen the way they do. Why does the minister hide the letter in plain sight? Why do the police fail? Why does Dupin succeed? So if you can answer those why questions, you are golden. So if you are studying this story, just keep these things in mind. Don't stress too much about fancy words or overcomplicated analysis. Just explain things in a clear and logical way, kind of like how Dupin solves the case. And that is the best way to approach this answer. So that's it for today. If you think that this video has helped you in any way or the other, do like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.